I'd been staring at the sonar display for 3 hours straight, and the readings still didn't make any sense. The screen showed geometric structures down in Mariana's shadow, clean lines and perfect angles sitting on the ocean floor at depths where the pressure should have crushed anything man-made into scrap metal decades ago. Eris, you need to see this. Lena's voice cut through my concentration. She was hunched over her workstation, auburn hair falling across her face as she studied the data streaming in from our deep-sea sensors. I walked over to her station, my coffee mug forgotten on the counter. The research vessel Helios rocked gently in the Pacific swells, but I barely noticed the motion anymore after 6 months aboard. "What have you got?" She pointed at her monitor. "The magnetometer's picking up massive metallic signatures. Look at these dimensions." Her finger traced across the screen. "We're talking about structures the size of city blocks down there." I leaned closer, studying the readouts. The numbers were staggering. Formations stretching for miles across the trench floor, all showing the same impossible geometric precision. "How deep?" 28,000 feet, give or take a few hundred. Lena sat back in her chair and crossed her arms. "Eris, there's no way anything natural creates patterns like this, and there's definitely no way anything artificial survives at those depths." But I was already thinking about the submersible. The Orpheus could handle the pressure. We'd designed her specifically for deep trench exploration. 2-person crew, titanium hull, enough life support for 12 hours. She was sitting in the launch bay right now, waiting. "We need to go down there," I said. Lena shook her head immediately. "Absolutely not. We don't know what we're dealing with. The pressure alone could kill us if something goes wrong with the hull integrity. And these readings," she gestured at her screen, "they're not behaving like normal sonar returns. The signals are shifting, almost like they're moving." I pulled up the sonar data on my own terminal and ran it through the analysis software. She was right. The structures seemed to pulse with some kind of internal rhythm, but that just made them more fascinating, not more dangerous. "Lena, this could be the discovery of the century. We can't just sit up here and take readings from 28,000 feet away." "We can, and we should." Her voice had that stern tone she used when she thought I was being reckless. "The pressure down there is over 1,000 times atmospheric pressure. One tiny breach in the hull, and we're dead in milliseconds." I understood her concerns, but I also understood what we were looking at. These weren't random rock formations or some kind of geological anomaly. The patterns were too regular, too purposeful. Something had built these structures, and I needed to know what. "The Orpheus is rated for 30,000 feet, I said. "We've got safety margins built in." "Safety margins don't account for the unknown." Lena stood up and walked to the porthole, staring out at the dark Pacific. "We don't know what's causing these readings. What if it's some kind of volcanic activity? What if there are unstable currents down there?" I spent the next 2 hours going through every piece of data we'd collected. The structures showed up on sonar, magnetometer, and even our experimental gravitational sensors. Whatever was down there was real, solid, and massive. The geometric patterns were too perfect to be natural. Someone or something had built them. By evening, I'd made up my mind. I found Lena in the galley, picking at a plate of reheated pasta. "I'm going down tomorrow," I told her. She looked up from her food. "Eris, we've been through this. I know you think it's dangerous, but we came out here to explore the deepest parts of the ocean. This is exactly what we're supposed to be doing." "We're supposed to be mapping the trench floor and collecting geological samples, not investigating mysterious structures that shouldn't exist." I sat down across from her. "What if this is why they shouldn't exist? What if someone else has been down there before us? That got her attention. Lena set down her fork and studied my face. You think these are artificial? I think they're too regular to be natural. And I think we owe it to ourselves to find out what they are. She was quiet for a long time, staring at her plate. Finally, she sighed. If we do this, and I'm not saying we should, we follow every safety protocol. Full systems check, backup communications, emergency ascent procedures ready at all times. Of course. And if anything looks wrong, anything at all, we abort immediately. Agreed. Lena nodded slowly. I'll start prepping the Orpheus in the morning. But Eris, I want it on record that I think this is a mistake. The next morning, we spent 4 hours running diagnostics on the submersible. Every system checked out perfectly. Life support, pressure hull, ballast tanks, thrusters, communications array. The Orpheus was as ready as she'd ever be. I climbed into the pilot's seat while Lena settled into the co-pilot position. The cramped interior smelled like recycled air and electronics. Through the thick porthole, I could see the launch bay crew making final preparations. Helios Control, this is Orpheus, I said into the comm system. Ready for launch. Copy, Orpheus. You're cleared for deployment. Maintain radio contact every 15 minutes. The launch mechanism engaged with a series of mechanical clanks, and suddenly we were dropping through the launch bay doors into the Pacific. The submersible hit the water with a splash that rocked us in our seats. Ballast tanks flooding, Lena reported, watching her instruments. Beginning descent. The sunlight faded quickly as we dropped through the water column. At 100 feet, the ocean turned deep blue. At 500 feet, it was black except for our external lights. The pressure gauge climbed steadily, 2 atmospheres, 5, 10. Radio check, came the voice from the Helios. The signal was already getting scratchy. Orpheus here, all systems nominal, depth 2,000 feet and descending. At 5,000 feet, the radio started cutting out completely. Lena tried adjusting the frequency, but the static just got worse. We're losing comms, she said. Expected at this depth. The Helios knows our dive plan. The hull groaned softly around us as the pressure increased. It was a normal sound, the titanium flexing under the enormous weight of water above us, but it still made my stomach tighten every time I heard it. At 15,000 feet, Lena checked our position against the sonar map. We're still on course. Target area should be about 13,000 feet below us. The descent felt endless. Outside the porthole, there was nothing but black water and the occasional bioluminescent flash from some deep-sea creature. The pressure gauge showed numbers that would have been lethal to any surface dweller. 800 atmospheres and climbing. 25,000 feet, Lena announced, hull integrity holding steady. I could feel the weight of the ocean pressing in on us from all sides. The Orpheus was a tiny bubble of air and life in an environment that wanted to crush us flat. But the submersible held together, just like she was designed to do. There, Lena said suddenly, pointing at her sonar display. I'm getting returns from the structures. I looked at my own instruments. The sonar was painting a picture of something massive rising from the trench floor. Geometric shapes that definitely weren't natural rock formations. 27,000 feet. We should have visual contact soon. I switched on the external floodlights and peered through the porthole. Nothing but black water for several more minutes. Then, gradually, something began to take shape in the distance. The hull groaned again, louder this time. Lena glanced at the pressure readings and frowned. Eris, we're at the edge of our safety envelope. If we go much deeper, just a little further, I can see something down there. The lights illuminated what looked like a wall of black stone rising from the ocean floor. As we descended closer, I could make out carved patterns covering the surface, intricate designs that definitely weren't natural. "My God," Lena whispered. "What is that thing?" The submersible's floodlights cut through the black water and hit something that shouldn't have existed. I pressed my face against the porthole, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The wall of stone rose from the ocean floor like a mountain, but the angles were all wrong. Sharp geometric patterns covered every surface, creating designs that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. "Jesus Christ," Lena whispered from her station. "Eris, are you seeing this?" I couldn't answer right away. The structure stretched beyond our lights in both directions, disappearing into the darkness. But it wasn't just the size that made my hands shake against the controls. The architecture was completely alien, surfaces that curved in impossible ways, doorways that seemed to fold in on themselves, and symbols carved deep into the black stone that made my eyes water when I tried to focus on them. "It's a temple," I finally managed to say, "or some kind of ceremonial structure." Lena adjusted our position, bringing us closer to what looked like the main facade. The stone was perfectly smooth, despite being under crushing pressure for who knows how long. No marine growth, no sediment buildup, nothing. It was like the ocean itself avoided touching the surface. "Look at those markings," she said, pointing at her monitor. "They're not random. There's a pattern." She was right. The glyphs seemed to pulse with their own internal light, creating sequences that repeated across the temple's surface. I tried to follow one pattern from left to right, but halfway through, a sharp pain shot through my skull. I jerked back from the porthole, blinking hard. "Don't stare at them directly," I warned. "Something about the way they're arranged. It's like they're designed to mess with your vision." Lena nodded, keeping her eyes on her instruments instead. "Pressure readings are still normal, but look at this." She tapped her screen. "The magnetometer is going crazy. The readings are jumping all over the place." I checked my own displays. She was right. Every gauge was fluctuating wildly. The depth finder couldn't get a consistent reading on the ocean floor. The sonar was picking up phantom returns that appeared and disappeared without explanation. Even our internal systems were acting up. The lights dimmed and brightened randomly, and I could hear the air recycling system cycling on and off in irregular patterns. "Equipment malfunction?" Lena asked, but her voice carried doubt. "All of it at once?" I shook my head. "That doesn't make sense." That's when I heard it. A low hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It vibrated through the hull, through my bones, through my thoughts. The sound wasn't just auditory. It felt like something crawling around inside my brain, looking for a way to take root. "You hear that?" I asked. Lena tilted her head, listening. "Yeah. What is it?" "I don't know." The hum grew stronger, and with it came a strange sensation of being watched. I looked out the porthole again, scanning the temple surface for any sign of movement. The glyphs continued their pulsing rhythm, but now they seemed synchronized with the humming sound. The water around us began to move. Not the gentle currents we'd encountered during our descent, but deliberate swirling patterns that defied the natural flow of the deep ocean. The Orpheus rocked slightly as invisible forces pushed and pulled at our hull. "Eris, the currents are all wrong," Lena said, studying her readings. "It's like something is controlling the water movement." I watched through the porthole as streams of water spiraled around the temple in perfect helixes. The patterns were too precise, too organized to be natural. Whatever was causing this had intelligence behind it. "We need to get closer," I said, reaching for the maneuvering controls. Are you insane? Lena grabbed my wrist. Our equipment is malfunctioning. We're hearing things that shouldn't exist, and the water is moving in ways that violate basic physics. This is exactly when we should be heading back to the surface. Look at it, Lena. I gestured toward the temple. This is the discovery of the century. Maybe the millennium. We can't just turn around and leave. We can and we should. Her grip tightened on my arm. Something is very wrong here. But I was already adjusting our position, bringing us alongside what appeared to be a docking area. The stone platform extended from the temple's base, perfectly sized for a vessel like ours. As we approached, the swirling currents seemed to guide us into position, as if the structure itself was helping us dock. Aris, don't do this, Lena pleaded. I ignored her protests and engaged the docking clamps. They locked onto the stone platform with a solid thunk that reverberated through the hull. We were attached to something that had been sitting on the ocean floor for thousands of years, maybe longer. We're going out there, I announced, already reaching for my diving suit. The pressure will kill us instantly if there's any breach in our suits. The suits are rated for this depth. We've tested them dozens of times. I pulled the heavy fabric over my shoulders, checking each seal carefully. We'll collect samples, document what we can, and be back in 30 minutes. Lena stared at me for a long moment, then sighed in defeat. If we're doing this, we follow every safety protocol. Constant communication, buddy system, and we abort at the first sign of trouble. Agreed. We spent the next 20 minutes suiting up and running diagnostics on our diving equipment. The suits were functioning perfectly, but I noticed the humming sound was even stronger now. It seemed to resonate through the water itself, creating vibrations I could feel in my chest. The airlock cycled, and suddenly we were outside the Orpheus, standing on the stone platform in the crushing darkness of the deep ocean. Our helmet lights illuminated the temple's entrance, a massive archway covered in the same pulsing glyphs that hurt to look at directly. Water temperature is normal, Lena reported through the comm system. Pressure readings are stable. I took a step toward the entrance and immediately noticed something impossible. The water around the temple entrance was completely still, not just calm, motionless. While currents swirled violently just meters away, the area directly in front of the archway was like a pocket of frozen time. Lena, are you seeing this? The water isn't moving, she confirmed, her voice tight with fear. That's not possible at this depth. We approached the entrance together, our lights revealing more details of the alien architecture. The archway was tall enough for us to walk through upright, and the stone was carved with intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story. I moved closer to examine the glyphs, and my blood turned cold. The carvings showed humanoid figures in various stages of drowning. Some were being pulled down by tentacles or tendrils. Others were offering themselves willingly to a massive entity with multiple limbs and no discernible face. The scenes depicted ritualistic sacrifice, with the drowning figures arranged in ceremonial positions around the multi-limbed creature. Aris, look at this, Lena called from the other side of the archway. I joined her and saw more carvings, these showing the aftermath of the sacrifices. The drowned figures were transformed, their bodies becoming part of the water itself, their faces peaceful in death. The entity in the center of each scene grew larger and more defined with each sacrifice, as if it was feeding on the deaths. What kind of civilization would create something like this? Lena whispered. I don't know, I replied. But the humming in my head was getting stronger, and with it came whispers that weren't quite words. They spoke of peace, of release, of joining something greater than myself. I shook my head, trying to clear the intrusive thoughts. Let's go inside. We need to document this. The entrance led to a vast chamber filled with the same still water. Our lights revealed walls covered in more glyphs, these ones moving in slow, hypnotic patterns that made me dizzy. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above us, and the floor was made of the same black stone, polished to a mirror finish. As we moved deeper into the temple, I realized the water wasn't just still. It was wrong. It felt thicker than normal seawater, more viscous, and it seemed to cling to our suits in ways that defied physics. Every step we took created ripples that spread too slowly and lasted too long. The whispers in my head grew louder, more insistent. They promised understanding, promised answers to questions I'd never thought to ask. All I had to do was listen, to let the water fill my lungs and carry me to a place of eternal knowledge. I stopped walking, suddenly aware that I'd been moving toward the center of the chamber without conscious thought. Lena was beside me, her helmet light sweeping across walls that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. The carvings on the central altar drew me in like nothing I'd ever seen before. I couldn't look away from the intricate patterns that seemed to shift and pulse with their own rhythm. The stone was smooth under my gloved hands as I traced the symbols, each one more complex than the last. They weren't random decorations. There was a purpose here, a meaning that felt just beyond my understanding. The altar itself was massive, easily 8 feet across and carved from the same black stone as the rest of the temple. Strange geometric shapes spiraled outward from the center, and I found myself following their paths with my eyes, getting lost in the hypnotic design. The longer I stared, the more the patterns seemed to move, like they were alive somehow. Aris, you need to see this. Lena's voice crackled through my comm system, but I barely heard her. The carvings were pulling me deeper into their mystery. I leaned closer, my helmet almost touching the stone surface. Just a minute, I mumbled back, not taking my eyes off the altar. There was something here, something important. The symbols were trying to tell me something, and I was so close to understanding. Lena was moving around the chamber, examining other sections of the temple walls. I could hear her breathing through the comm, steady and controlled as she documented what she found. The sound was comforting in this alien place, a reminder that I wasn't alone down here. But the altar kept calling to me. The pattern seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat, and I felt a strange warmth spreading through my chest despite the freezing water around us. This was what we'd come here for. This was the discovery that would change everything. Aris, Lena's voice came again, but this time there was something different about it, a tension I hadn't heard before. What is it? I asked, still not looking away from the carvings. My comm system is acting up. There's some kind of interference. The crackling in my earpiece got worse, and I finally forced myself to turn away from the altar. Lena was about 20 feet away, near one of the side walls covered in smaller glyphs. She had her hand pressed against her helmet, like she was trying to adjust something. What kind of interference? I asked, swimming toward her. I don't know. Something's blocking my vision. There's like a fog or something inside my helmet. That didn't make sense. Our helmets were sealed units. Nothing could get inside them. I moved closer, trying to see what she was talking about. Her visor looked clear from the outside. Lena, your helmet looks fine from here. Are you sure it's not just condensation? No, this is different. It's like water, but that's impossible. The seal is intact. My blood went cold. Water inside her helmet would mean a breach, and at this depth, even the smallest leak would be catastrophic. I swam faster toward her, my heart pounding. Lena, we need to get back to the Orpheus right now. if there's any chance of a breach. Eris, I can't see. Her voice was panicked now, and I watched in horror as she started thrashing in the water. There's water in my helmet. How is there water in my helmet? I reached her just as she started clawing at her visor. Through the clear faceplate, I could see water sloshing around inside, covering her face. But there was no visible damage to the helmet, no cracks or holes where water could have entered. Hold still, I shouted, grabbing her arms. Let me check the seals. But even as I examined her helmet, I could see the water level rising inside. It was already up to her nose, and she was tilting her head back, trying to keep her mouth and nose above the surface. The terror in her eyes was something I'd never forget. The seals are intact, I said, my voice shaking. This shouldn't be possible. That's when I saw it. Behind Lena, the water began to shimmer and coalesce into something that shouldn't exist. A form made entirely of water, but somehow distinct from the ocean around us. It had no real shape at first, just a vague outline that seemed to shift and flow. But as I watched, frozen in disbelief, it began to take on a more defined appearance. The thing was roughly humanoid, but wrong in every way that mattered. Its body was translucent, made of the same dark water that surrounded us, but it moved with purpose and intelligence. Where a face should have been, there was nothing but smooth water, except for a single point of light deep within what might have been its head. The light pulsed with the same rhythm as the carvings on the altar. Lena, I whispered, but she couldn't hear me anymore. The water in her helmet had reached her mouth, and she was drowning right in front of me. The entity, because that's what it was, not just water, but something alive and aware, extended what looked like tendrils toward Lena. They wrapped around her arms and legs with impossible strength, and I realized with growing horror that this thing was the source of the water in her helmet. Get away from her, I screamed, lunging forward. But before I could reach them, an invisible force slammed into me like a freight train. I flew backward through the water, my arms windmilling as I tried to regain control. My back hit the temple wall hard enough that I heard something crack. Hopefully the stone and not my equipment. My visor spider-webbed from the impact, and for a terrifying moment I thought it might shatter completely. But it held, though I could see the stress fractures spreading across my field of vision. When I looked back toward Lena, her struggles were getting weaker. The light from her helmet was dimming as her systems failed, and the entity held her in its watery embrace like she weighed nothing at all. The tendrils had completely enveloped her now, and I could see her body going limp. No, 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 I gasped, swimming desperately toward them. But I was too far away, and the entity was too strong. Lena's light went out. The silence that followed was deafening. Even through my damaged comm system, I should have been able to hear her breathing, her heartbeat, something. But there was nothing. Just the low hum that had been with us since we entered this place, now seeming to mock me with its persistence. The entity turned toward me then, and I felt its attention like a physical weight pressing down on my mind. The single light in its head focused on me, and suddenly I could hear whispers that weren't coming through my comm system. They were inside my head, speaking directly to my thoughts. Peace, the voices said, overlapping and echoing in ways that made my skull ache. Final embrace. No more struggle. No more pain. The words were seductive, promising an end to all the fear and confusion. Part of me wanted to listen, to let the entity take me the way it had taken Lena. It would be so easy to just stop fighting, to let the water fill my lungs and carry me away from all of this. But terror overrode everything else. Raw, animal panic that sent me scrambling backward through the water toward the temple entrance. I had to get out of here. I had to get back to the Orpheus. The entity glided after me with fluid grace, its form rippling as it moved. It didn't seem to be in any hurry. It knew I had nowhere to go. Why do you run? She is at peace now, "Joiner, join us." I kicked harder, my breathing ragged inside the helmet. The entrance to the temple seemed impossibly far away, and my damaged visor made everything look distorted and wrong. But I could see the faint glow of the Orpheus's lights through the archway, and that gave me something to focus on. The creature stayed just behind me, close enough that I could feel the displacement of water from its movement. It was toying with me, I realized. It could have caught me easily if it wanted to, but it seemed to enjoy the chase, feeding off my fear. I burst through the temple entrance and onto the stone platform where we docked the submersible. The Orpheus sat there like a beacon of hope, its hull gleaming under the floodlights. I'd never been so happy to see anything in my life. But as I reached for the airlock controls, I could feel the entity emerging from the temple behind me, its presence like ice water in my veins. The temple walls started moving around me, stretching like rubber. What had been a straight path to the entrance now twisted into impossible angles. I turned left where I knew the exit should be, but found myself facing another corridor that hadn't been there before. The stone passages folded in on themselves, creating a maze that defied any logic. I tried retracing my steps, but the hallway behind me had changed too. Where there should have been the chamber where Lena died, I found only more twisting corridors. The whispers in my head grew louder, no longer just background noise, but a constant stream of voices. "Join her," they said. "Stop fighting. The water is warm here." I pressed my hands against my helmet, trying to block out the sound, but it came from inside my skull. The voices multiplied, overlapping until they became a chorus of the drowned. I could hear Lena's voice among them now, calling my name. "Aris, why did you leave me? Come back. The water doesn't hurt anymore." I stumbled forward, choosing corridors at random. Each turn led to another passage, another dead end, another choice that seemed wrong. The temple was playing with me, keeping me trapped while the entity worked its way into my mind. The visions started without warning. One moment I was running through stone corridors, the next I was back in the chamber watching Lena drown all over again. But this time, I didn't run. This time, I walked toward the entity and let it wrap its tendrils around me. The water filled my helmet, and I felt the same peace Lena must have felt as everything went dark. I snapped back to reality, gasping inside my helmet. I was standing in yet another corridor, having lost several minutes to the hallucination. The whispers laughed at my confusion. See how easy it would be? No more guilt. No more pain. Just peace in the depths. I forced myself to keep moving, ignoring the voices. There had to be a way out. The temple couldn't actually be infinite. It was just messing with my perception. I focused on the feel of the stone walls, using my hands to guide me when my eyes couldn't trust what they saw. Another vision hit me. This time I was drowning in my childhood swimming pool, my parents watching from the deck chairs, doing nothing to help. The water was thick and warm, like blood. I sank to the bottom and saw Lena waiting for me there, her face pale and her eyes empty. "You killed me," she said. "You brought us here. You wanted to find something, and you found death." I shook my head violently, breaking free of the vision. I was back in the corridor, but now water was seeping through the stone walls. Not much at first, just a thin film that made the carved symbols glisten. But it was spreading, pooling at my feet. The entity was bringing its environment with it, turning the temple into an extension of the deep ocean. I had to get out before it flooded completely. I ran now, not caring which direction I chose. The whispers followed me, promising relief from the guilt that ate at me every day. They showed me more visions, Lena's face as the entity took her, her hand reaching out for help that never came, her voice calling my name as I fled like a coward. "You could have saved her. The voices said. You could have fought for her. Instead, you ran. They were right, and that made it worse. I had run. I had left her to die while I saved myself. The guilt was a weight in my chest, heavier than the water pressure outside. But guilt wouldn't bring her back, and dying here wouldn't honor her memory. I pushed through another corridor, and suddenly I could see light ahead, the pale glow of the Orpheus's external floods. The exit was there, just 50 feet away, but as I ran toward it, the corridor stretched again, making the distance impossible. I ran harder, my breathing ragged inside the helmet, but the exit stayed just out of reach. You can't leave, the whispers said. This is where you belong, with us, with her. I closed my eyes and kept running, trusting my sense of direction instead of what I could see. The stone floor was solid under my feet, real in a way the shifting walls weren't. I counted my steps, measuring the distance I should have covered. When I opened my eyes, I was through the entrance and standing on the stone platform. Inside the submersible, I went straight to the pilot's seat and started the emergency ascent sequence. The docking clamps released with a metallic clang, and I fired the ballast tanks. The Orpheus shot upward like a cork, rising faster than any safe ascent profile. The depth gauge spun backward, 26,000 feet, 25,000, 24,000. I should have been worried about decompression sickness, but all I could think about was getting away from that thing before it followed me up. The hull creaked and groaned under the rapid pressure change. Warning lights flashed across the control panel, and alarms started blaring. The ascent was too fast, too violent, but I couldn't make myself slow down. At 15,000 feet, something slammed into the hull. The whole submersible shuddered, and I was thrown against the control panel. Through the porthole, I caught a glimpse of something massive moving in the water beside us, a writhing mass of tentacles and flowing water that kept pace with our ascent. It was following me up. The creature's form was less solid here, more dispersed in the lighter water, but it was still there, still hunting. I pushed the engines harder, dumping more ballast, anything to gain speed. Another impact, this one from below. The hull rang like a bell, and hairline cracks appeared in the porthole glass. The creature was trying to drag us back down, back to its domain in the depths. At 10,000 feet, the attack stopped. I looked through the porthole and saw only empty water. The creature had given up, unable to maintain its form in the higher pressure zones. Or maybe it was just waiting, knowing I'd have to come back down eventually. The ascent continued in relative quiet, broken only by the groaning hull and the constant blare of alarms. At 5,000 feet, I regained radio contact with the Helios. Orpheus, this is Helios Control. We're reading emergency ascent. What's your status? I keyed the radio with shaking hands. Helios, this is Orpheus. Emergency ascent in progress. Lena didn't make it. Requesting immediate medical assistance on arrival. Copy that, Orpheus. Medical team is standing by. What happened down there? I stared at the radio, trying to find words for what I'd seen. How could I explain the temple, the entity, the way Lena had drowned in her sealed helmet? Who would believe any of it? Equipment malfunction, I said finally. Helmet breach. I'll provide full details and debrief. The surface came up fast, too fast. The Orpheus breached like a whale, throwing spray in all directions before settling into the swells. Within minutes, the Helios's recovery boat was alongside, and divers were attaching the lift cables. They hauled me up in a basket, my body racked with the bends from the rapid ascent. Every joint felt like it was on fire, and I could barely breathe. The medical team was waiting on deck with oxygen and IV fluids. "Where's Dr. Petrova?" someone asked as they loaded me onto a stretcher. "Gone," I managed to say before the pain medication kicked in and everything went dark. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed, my body still aching from the decompression sickness. A man in a Navy uniform was sitting beside the bed, holding a tablet and looking official. "Dr. Thorne, I'm Commander Hayes from the Naval Safety Board. I need to ask you some questions about the incident." I told him everything, the temple, the entity, the way Lena had died. He listened without expression, occasionally making notes on his tablet. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Dr. Thorne, I've reviewed the data from the Orpheus. The internal cameras were completely destroyed, along with most of the sensor logs. What little we recovered shows severe electromagnetic interference at depth." "That was the entity," I said. "It affected all our equipment." Hayes shook his head. "The medical examiner's report indicates you suffered severe nitrogen narcosis during the dive. Combined with the trauma of losing your partner, it's not uncommon to experience vivid hallucinations. I know what I saw. I'm sure you believe that. But the evidence suggests equipment failure. Dr. Petrova's helmet seal failed catastrophically, causing rapid flooding. You attempted a rescue, but were forced to abort due to your own compromised mental state." I tried to sit up, but the pain in my joints stopped me. "That's not what happened. There was something down there, something alive. The board's official finding is equipment malfunction resulting in accidental death. Dr. Petrova's family has been notified, and her body was recovered from the wreckage site. They'd found her body. That meant the entity had released her, probably when it followed me to the surface. I wondered if she looked peaceful, or if her face still showed the terror of those final moments." Hayes stood up, closing his tablet. "You're being relieved of duty pending psychological evaluation. The Navy appreciates your service, but given the circumstances, we can't recommend you for future deep-sea operations." After he left, I lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling. They didn't believe me. Worse, they thought I was crazy, suffering from nitrogen narcosis and trauma-induced hallucinations. My career was over, my reputation destroyed, and Lena was still dead. The guilt settled over me like a weight, heavier than any ocean pressure. I'd led her down there. I'd insisted on exploring the temple despite her warnings. I'd left her to die while I saved myself. And now, no one would ever know the truth about what killed her. The official report would say equipment failure. The newspapers would call it a tragic accident. But I would carry the real story for the rest of my life, knowing that somewhere in the depths of Mariana's shadow, an ancient entity waited in its temple, patient and hungry, ready for the next explorer foolish enough to disturb its rest. I'd been living in Mendocino for 3 months when the nightmares started getting worse. The little coastal town was supposed to be peaceful. That's what the rental agent had told me when I'd shown up with cash and no references. Just a quiet place where a guy could disappear for a while. The house sat on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, which seemed like a cruel joke now. Every morning I woke up to the sound of waves crashing against the rocks below, and every morning I had to fight the urge to pack up and drive inland until I couldn't smell salt in the air anymore. I couldn't shower, hadn't been able to since the hospital. The sound of water hitting the shower floor sent me into full panic mode, heart racing, hands shaking, the whole deal. I'd tried exactly once, 2 weeks after moving in, and ended up curled on the bathroom floor hyperventilating while the water ran cold. Now I used baby wipes and dry shampoo like some kind of survivalist. Drinking water was almost as bad. I'd switched to bottled water exclusively, the kind that came in small containers so I could drink it fast without having to look at it too long. Tap water was completely off limits. The sound of it flowing from the faucet reminded me too much of the temple, of Lena's helmet filling up while I stood there like an idiot. The dreams were the worst part. Every night, Lena's face floated in dark water, her eyes wide with terror behind her cracked visor. Sometimes she'd mouth words I couldn't hear. Sometimes she'd just stare at me with that look of betrayal I'd seen in her final moments. I'd wake up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, and spend the rest of the night sitting in my kitchen with all the lights on. I'd stopped trying to convince anyone after the third psychiatrist suggested I might benefit from extended inpatient treatment. The house came furnished, which was good because I'd left everything behind when I'd fled San Diego. Everything except the equipment I'd salvaged from the Helios before they'd decommissioned her. 3 boxes of communication gear, data storage devices, and audio equipment that I'd somehow managed to smuggle out during the chaos of the investigation. I'd set it all up in the study, a small room at the back of the house that faced away from the ocean. The equipment looked out of place among the rental furniture. All those blinking lights and digital displays in a room decorated with generic coastal artwork and driftwood sculptures. For weeks I just stared at it. The corrupted data files from our dive sat on encrypted drives, waiting for me to work up the courage to analyze them. Part of me wanted to throw it all away, to pretend none of it had ever happened. But I couldn't. Lena deserved better than that. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning in late September. I was making coffee. Instant, because the sound of the coffee maker brewing reminded me too much of bubbling water. When I heard it, a low hum coming from somewhere in the walls. I'd lived in enough old houses to know the sound of pipes settling or a furnace kicking on. This wasn't that. This was the same frequency I'd heard in the temple, the same resonance that had made my teeth ache 28,000 feet below the surface. I followed the sound through the house, pressing my ear to walls and checking every faucet. Nothing. The hum seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, just like it had in the depths. When I finally gave up looking, it stopped. That night, I found a puddle of water in the middle of my living room floor. Not near any windows or doors, not under any pipes. Just a perfect circle of salt water sitting on the hardwood like someone had poured it there while I slept. I cleaned it up with paper towels, my hands shaking the whole time. The water was ice cold and smelled like the deep ocean. When I was done, I checked every window and door in the house, looking for leaks. Everything was sealed tight. The next morning there were 3 more puddles. One in the hallway, one in the kitchen, and one right outside my bedroom door. Each one perfectly round, each one salt water, each one impossible to explain. I started sleeping with the lights on. The shadows came next. I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision, dark shapes sliding across the walls when there was nothing to cast them. They moved like water, flowing and rippling in ways that made my stomach turn. When I'd turn to look directly, they'd be gone. But the worst part was the reflections. Any surface that could hold water, a glass, a bowl, even the condensation on a window, would show movement that wasn't there. Shapes that looked almost human, reaching up from impossible depths. I stopped looking in mirrors when my eyes were wet. 3 weeks into October, I finally worked up the courage to boot up the equipment in my study. The data from the Helios was corrupted but not completely destroyed. Fragments of sonar readings, partial audio files, corrupted video feeds from the Orpheus's external cameras. I spent hours going through it all, piece by piece. Most of it was garbage, digital noise and scrambled data that told me nothing. But buried in the audio files, I found something that made my blood run cold. The hum. The same frequency I'd been hearing in my house, recorded during our descent to the temple. It was faint, almost lost in the background noise, but it was there, a low, resonant tone that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. I isolated the frequency and ran it through every analysis program I had. The results were impossible. The sound operated on multiple wavelengths simultaneously, some of them outside the normal range of human hearing. But more than that, it seemed to create interference patterns with itself, generating harmonics that shouldn't exist. It wasn't just sound. It was something else entirely. Something that used sound as a carrier wave for something deeper. Something that could reach into your mind and plant thoughts that weren't your own. I was staring at the waveform display when the lights went out. The house plunged into darkness, and immediately I heard it. That familiar hum, but louder now, coming from every direction at once. The equipment in my study flickered back to life, running on battery power, and the displays cast an eerie blue glow across the room. Water began seeping under the door. I watched in horror as a thin line of salt water crept across the floor, spreading outward like it was alive. The hum grew louder, and I could feel it in my bones now, that same resonance that had filled the temple. The water reached my feet, ice cold even through my shoes. I backed against the far wall, but there was nowhere to go. The study had only one door, and the water was coming from that direction. On the equipment displays, the waveform analysis was going crazy. The frequency I'd isolated was spiking, creating patterns that hurt to look at. And underneath it all, barely audible through the speakers, I could hear something else. Whispers. The same voices I'd heard in the temple, speaking in languages that predated human civilization. They were calling my name, promising peace, promising an end to the guilt and the nightmares, promising I could see Lena again. The water was up to my ankles now, and I could see shapes moving in it. Dark forms that reached upward like grasping hands. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees in seconds, and my breath came out in visible puffs. I looked at the communication equipment, still running on battery power, still analyzing that impossible frequency. The same frequency that was filling my house, turning it into something that belonged in the depths of the ocean. The frequency that was bridging the gap between the entity's realm and mine. I spent the next few days digging through maritime records and folklore databases, trying to make sense of what was happening to me. The university library had digitized collections of Pacific Northwest maritime history, and I found myself scrolling through centuries-old ship logs and coastal legends. That's when I found the first reference to something called the Singing Chasm. A whaling ship captain from 1847 had written about hearing voices from the deep waters off the coast, describing how his crew became entranced by what sounded like women singing beneath the waves. 3 men had jumped overboard before he could order the ship away from the area. I kept searching and found more accounts. A fishing vessel in 1903 reported similar phenomena, crew members claiming they could hear their dead wives calling to them from the water. The captain had noted strange sonar readings from what he called the deep place where no fish swim. The pattern was always the same. Ships would encounter the entity in deep water. Crew members would hear voices of people they'd lost, and some would be compelled to enter the water. Those who survived described feeling like something was trying to pull them down, to make them part of whatever lived in the depths. I realized the creature wasn't bound to that temple at all. The temple had just been a focal point, a place where it could concentrate its power. But making contact with it had changed something fundamental. I'd become a new anchor point, a way for it to reach into the world above. The manifestations around my house started getting worse after that discovery. I'd be sitting in the living room when I'd hear the shower turn on upstairs. The first time it happened, I thought maybe the handle had gotten loose. I climbed the stairs and found water spraying everywhere, soaking the bathroom floor and seeping under the door into the hallway. I turned off the water and checked the handle. It was tight. No way it could have moved on its own. But as I stood there with water dripping from the ceiling, I heard that familiar hum coming from the pipes. 2 days later, the kitchen faucet exploded while I was making coffee. Water shot out with enough force to knock over the sugar bowl and soak the counter. I scrambled to find the shutoff valve under the sink, my hands shaking as I twisted it closed. The plumber I called couldn't explain it. Said the pipes looked fine, no sign of excessive pressure or wear. He replaced the faucet anyway, but I could see the confusion in his eyes when he left. That night, the bathroom sink did the same thing. Then the utility room. Every faucet in the house seemed to be turning against me, like the creature was testing its ability to control water wherever I lived. I started sleeping with a wrench next to my bed, so I could shut off the main water line if I needed to. But even that didn't help when I woke up one night to the sound of dripping. I opened my eyes and immediately felt cold water soaking through my socks. The bedroom floor was covered in about 2 inches of salt water, even though I'd shut off the main line before going to bed. The water had that same thick quality I remembered from the temple, clinging to everything it touched. I grabbed my phone and used the flashlight to look around the room. That's when I saw it, a wet handprint on the wall next to my bed, about the size of a woman's hand. The fingers were too long, stretching down the wall in streaks of moisture that hadn't been there when I'd gone to sleep. I backed toward the door, my feet splashing in the salt water that shouldn't have been able to get into my house. The handprint seemed to glisten in the phone's light, and for a moment I could swear I saw it move, the fingers flexing like they were trying to grab something. The creature was recreating its environment wherever I went. It was turning my house into an extension of that underwater temple, bringing the deep ocean into my bedroom. Just like it had done with Lena, it was trying to claim me by surrounding me with water until I couldn't escape. I spent the rest of that night sitting in my car in the driveway, watching the house and trying to figure out what to do. The water had receded by morning, leaving only salt stains on the hardwood floor, and that handprint dried into a white outline on the wall. But I could feel it getting stronger. Each manifestation was more aggressive than the last, more real. The creature was learning how to exist in my world, using me as a bridge between the depths and the surface. And I was running out of time to figure out how to stop it. The wind had been picking up all afternoon, rattling the windows of my rental house like something trying to get in. I'd been ignoring it, hunched over my laptop in the living room, trying to distract myself with research that didn't involve water or temples or things that shouldn't exist. But by 6 o'clock, the gusts were strong enough to shake the whole house. I walked to the front window and looked out at the Pacific. Dark clouds stretched across the horizon like a bruise, moving fast toward shore. The ocean below looked angry, white caps breaking against the rocks with more force than usual. This wasn't just weather. This was the kind of storm that knocked out power lines and flooded basements. The lights flickered once, then twice. I grabbed my phone to check the battery. 73%. Good enough. The wind howled around the corners of the house, and I could hear something loose banging against the side wall. Probably a shutter or piece of siding. Then the power went out. The house plunged into darkness so complete I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise. No hum from the refrigerator, no whir from the heater, just the storm outside and my own breathing. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight and swept it around the living room. Everything looked normal. Too normal. The beam caught the edges of furniture, the stack of books on the coffee table, the empty water glass I'd left on the side table earlier. Nothing out of place. But something felt wrong. The temperature in the room dropped fast. My breath started coming out in visible puffs, and I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders. The cold wasn't coming from outside. It was seeping up from the floorboards, radiating from the walls like the house itself was turning into a freezer. That's when I heard the first drip. It came from somewhere behind me, a soft plinking sound like water hitting hardwood. I spun around, phone light cutting through the darkness, but saw nothing. Just my empty living room and the shadows dancing at the edges of the beam. Another drip. Then another. I followed the sound toward the kitchen, my bare feet silent on the cold floor. The dripping was coming from above, somewhere near the ceiling. I aimed my light up and saw a dark stain spreading across the white paint, water beading and falling in steady drops. But there was no second floor above the kitchen, just the roof, and the roof had been fine this morning. The stain grew larger as I watched, water now streaming down the wall in thin rivulets. The drops hitting the floor weren't clear. They were dark, almost black in my phone's light, and they smelled like salt and something else, something organic and wrong. More stains appeared on other parts of the ceiling. Water began dripping from the light fixtures, running down the walls, pooling on the hardwood in expanding circles. The house was leaking from everywhere at once, as if the storm had somehow gotten inside the walls themselves. I backed toward the living room, but the water was there too, seeping through the baseboards, bubbling up between the floorboards, running down the windows in sheets even though the glass wasn't broken. The salt smell got stronger, mixing with that familiar scent of deep ocean and decay that I remembered from the temple. My phone light caught movement in one of the puddles near my feet. The water was swirling in a slow spiral, defying gravity, moving with purpose. Other puddles started doing the same thing, all rotating in the same direction, all connected by thin streams that flowed uphill when they needed to. The whispers started then. Soft at first, just at the edge of hearing, like voices carried on the wind. But they weren't coming from outside. They were coming from the water itself, rising up from every puddle and stream like the house had become a speaker system for something vast and hungry. Eris. My name, spoken in a voice I recognized. A voice that made my chest tighten and my hands shake. Eris. Why did you leave me? Lena's voice, clear as if she were standing right next to me. But Lena was dead. I'd watched her drown in that helmet, watched the light go out of her eyes while something made of water and malice held her down. I'm so cold, Eris. So alone down here. The water on the floor began to rise, not flowing in from outside, but simply appearing, as if the house itself was transforming into something else. The familiar furniture started to look wrong in the shifting light. The couch became a stone altar. The coffee table turned into carved pillars covered in those same pulsing glyphs I'd seen in the temple. I stumbled backward, but the living room was changing around me. The walls stretched upward, becoming the curved stone surfaces of the underwater temple. The ceiling disappeared into darkness that my phone light couldn't penetrate. The water was up to my ankles now, thick and cold and wrong. You killed me, Eris. Lena's voice was closer now, coming from directly behind me. I spun around and saw her standing in the center of what had been my living room. She looked exactly as she had in the temple. Diving suit, helmet, the same expression of trust and determination she'd worn when we'd first entered that cursed place. Except her helmet was full of water. Dark water that sloshed when she moved her head, and her eyes were the pale, clouded eyes of something that had been dead for months. You were supposed to protect me, she said, water spilling from her helmet with each word. You were supposed to get us both out safely. You're not real, I said, but my voice came out as a whisper. You're dead. I saw you die. Because of you." She took a step toward me, water sloshing around her boots. "Because you had to explore. Because you couldn't leave well enough alone." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. She was right. I had pushed for the dive. I had insisted we go deeper, get closer, ignore the warning signs. If I'd listened to her concerns, if I'd been more careful, she'd still be alive. "I'm sorry," I said. "God, Lena, I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't bring me back." Another step closer. The water around my legs was rising faster now, up to my knees and climbing. "Sorry doesn't change what you did." Behind her, the water began to move. Not flowing, but gathering, pulling itself together into a shape that was almost human but wrong in every detail. Too tall, too fluid, with appendages that shifted between arms and tentacles and something else entirely. The same thing that had killed her in the temple. "Join me, Eris," Lena said, reaching out with one gloved hand. "Stop fighting, stop running, just let go." The creature behind her solidified further, its form becoming more defined. I could see the intelligence in its movements, the deliberate way it positioned itself between me and any possible escape route. This wasn't just a manifestation or a hallucination. This thing was here, in my house, using the storm and the darkness to bridge the gap between its realm and mine. "It's peaceful down here," Lena continued, her voice taking on that same hypnotic quality I remembered from the temple whispers. "No pain, no guilt, no regret. Just the deep, quiet dark." The water was at my waist now, and I could feel something moving beneath the surface. Tendrils, just like the ones that had wrapped around Lena's helmet and pulled her down. They brushed against my legs, testing, exploring, getting ready to drag me under. "No," I said louder this time. "You're not Lena. Lena would never ask me to give up." The thing wearing her face smiled, and for a moment the illusion slipped. Her features shifted, becoming something aquatic and alien before snapping back to human. "But I am asking, Eris. I'm begging. Come with me. Make this right." The creature behind her moved closer, its tendrils reaching out through the water. I could feel them wrapping around my ankles, cold and strong and patient. The water was up to my chest now, and my phone was starting to short out, the light flickering and dimming. "Stop fighting," the Lena thing whispered. "Just breathe in the water. It's easier than you think." My vision started to blur, not from the failing light, but from something else. Images flashed through my mind, memories that weren't mine, visions of the deep ocean and the temple and things that lived in the spaces between spaces. The creature was in my head, just like before, trying to overwhelm me with guilt and despair and the promise of an end to all suffering. I saw myself sinking into the dark water, felt the peace of letting go, the relief of finally paying for what I'd done to Lena. It would be so easy. Just stop struggling, stop breathing, stop carrying the weight of my mistakes. But something in me rebelled, some stubborn part that refused to give in, that remembered why I'd survived the temple in the first place. I wasn't going to die here, not like this, not to this thing that was using Lena's memory as a weapon against me. I forced myself to move, pushing through the water toward the hallway that led to my study. The creature's tendrils tightened around my legs, trying to hold me back, but I kept going. The fake Lena called after me, her voice shifting between pleading and angry. "You can't run forever, Eris. I'll follow you wherever you go." The water was flowing with me now, pouring down the hallway like a river. My study door was just ahead, and behind it was the equipment I'd salvaged from the Helios. The same equipment that had recorded the creature's frequency, that had helped me understand what I was dealing with. The tendrils around my ankles pulled harder, trying to drag me back toward the living room where the creature waited. I grabbed the door frame and hauled myself forward, feeling something tear in my leg as the tendrils finally let go. I stumbled into the study, water rushing in around me, and slammed the door behind me. Not that it would stop something made of water, but it bought me a few seconds to think. The room was already flooding, water seeping through the walls and floor, but my equipment was still there on the desk where I'd left it. The creature's whispers followed me through the door, promising peace and reunion and an end to the guilt that had been eating me alive for months. But I wasn't listening anymore. I had work to do. I stood there in the flooded study, water up to my chest, watching the creature's tendrils reach for me through the dark liquid. My heart hammered against my ribs as Lena's voice echoed from somewhere in the swirling mass, still calling for me to join her in the depths. The thing had followed me here, turned my house into its underwater domain, and now it wanted to finish what it started in that temple. But something clicked in my brain as I stared at the writhing form. This wasn't really water anymore. It was the creature itself, using water as a vessel. I couldn't fight it the way I'd been trying. You can't drown something that's already made of water. The psychic connection. That's what I needed to break. I remembered the frequency I'd isolated weeks ago from the dive recordings, the one that had made my equipment spike and brought the creature closer to our world. If that sound could bridge the gap between dimensions, maybe it could also sever the link. The communication equipment from the Helios sat on the desk behind me, partially submerged but still functional. I'd salvaged the most important pieces: the signal processors, the amplifiers, the speakers. Everything I needed was right there. I lunged backward through the water, ignoring the tendrils that wrapped around my legs and tried to pull me down. The creature's form shifted, becoming more solid as it sensed what I was doing. Lena's face materialized in the dark water, her eyes pleading. "Don't leave me again, Eris," she whispered. "You promised we'd stay together." My hands shook as I reached for the equipment. The main processor was still dry, protected by its waterproof casing. I yanked cables free and started connecting them with desperate speed. The creature pressed closer, and I felt its cold presence pushing into my mind, trying to overwhelm me with guilt and despair. "I'm sorry, Lena," I said through gritted teeth, my fingers working to patch the signal generator into the amplifier system. "But you're not really her." The thing wearing Lena's face snarled, and for a moment I saw through the illusion to the writhing mass of tentacles and eyes beneath. It had been using my memories against me, feeding on my guilt to maintain its hold in this world. I found the frequency file on the processor's memory and loaded it into the system. The waveform appeared on the small display, those same impossible patterns that had haunted my nightmares. But now I understood what they really were. Not just sound, but a key. A way to lock or unlock the barrier between worlds. The creature sensed what I was doing and surged forward. Tendrils wrapped around my arms, trying to pull me away from the equipment. The water rose higher, reaching my neck. I had maybe 30 seconds before it dragged me under completely. My finger hovered over the broadcast button. The speakers were submerged now, but they were designed for underwater use. If this worked, the frequency would propagate through the water itself, hitting the creature with maximum intensity. "You killed her," the thing hissed in Lena's voice. "You led her down there to die." "Maybe I did," I said and pressed the button. The sound that erupted from the speakers wasn't quite audible. It was something deeper, something that resonated in my bones and made my teeth ache. The water around me began to vibrate, and the creature's form immediately started to destabilize. It shrieked, but not with one voice. Dozens of voices screamed at once. All the people it had claimed over the years, all the sailors and divers who had heard the call from the deep and answered. The sound was deafening, a chorus of the drowned that made my ears ring. The creature's tendrils released me as its form began to dissolve. The dark water that had been solid and grasping became ordinary liquid again, sloshing around the room as the thing lost cohesion. The temperature rose, and the oppressive weight that had been pressing down on my mind lifted like a fog clearing. I cranked the amplifier to maximum power, flooding the room with the destabilizing frequency. The creature made one last desperate attempt to reform, pulling itself together into a vaguely humanoid shape, but the sound tore it apart faster than it could rebuild. With a final, multi-voiced wail that seemed to come from the depths of the ocean itself, the entity collapsed completely. The dark water lost its unnatural properties and became just water again, cold, salty, but no longer alive with malevolent intelligence. The psychic connection that had been binding us together snapped like a broken cable. I felt it go. A sudden absence in my mind where the creature's presence had been a constant weight for months. The whispers stopped. The sense of being watched disappeared. For the first time since the dive, I was truly alone in my own head. I stood there gasping in the waist-deep water, my finger still on the broadcast button, hardly believing it was over. The storm outside was already beginning to pass. I could hear the wind dying down and the rain becoming lighter against the windows. The house was destroyed. Water damage covered everything, and I could see cracks in the walls where the supernatural flooding had warped the structure. But the water was receding now, draining away through gaps in the floorboards and seeping back into whatever dimension the creature had come from. I turned off the equipment and unplugged it from the wall, my hands still shaking from adrenaline. The frequency file was still there on the display, those impossible waveforms that had saved my life. I'd keep the equipment, but I never wanted to use it again. The link was broken. The creature couldn't manifest in my world anymore, couldn't use me as an anchor point to reach the surface. I'd severed the connection that had been forged in that temple 28,000 feet below the Pacific. I waded through the receding water toward the door, stepping carefully over debris and broken furniture. The house groaned around me as it settled, damaged but still standing. Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to show through the storm clouds. The apartment complex in Barstow looked like every other one I'd seen driving through the Mojave. Beige stucco walls, cracked asphalt parking lot, and not a drop of water in sight for miles. That's exactly what I wanted. I'd driven for 6 hours straight from Mendocino, stopping only for gas and to throw away the last of my belongings that reminded me of the ocean. The rental agent, a woman named Dorothy who looked like she'd been baked by the desert sun for decades, handed me the keys without asking many questions. Cash up front had a way of making people incurious. "Unit 212, she said, pointing toward the second floor. "Water's included in rent, but don't go crazy with it. We're in a drought." I almost laughed at that. If she only knew how little water I planned to use. The apartment was small, just a bedroom, bathroom, kitchenette, and living room that faced east toward more desert. No ocean view, no sound of waves, no humidity in the air that might condense on surfaces. I'd specifically requested a unit that didn't face any of the complex's small decorative fountains, though even those made my skin crawl when I'd walked past them. I spent the first day setting up the communication equipment from the Helios in the bedroom closet. The processors, amplifiers, and speakers fit on a metal shelf I'd bought at a hardware store in town. Everything was still functional, though I'd tested it only once since that night in Mendocino. I wrapped the cables carefully and made sure the power connections were secure, then closed the closet door and tried not to think about it. The second day, I started my new routine. Every morning, I'd wake up and check every surface in the apartment for condensation. The windows first, running my finger along the glass to make sure it was completely dry. Then the bathroom mirror, the kitchen faucet, even the inside of the refrigerator. Any moisture got wiped away immediately with paper towels that I threw in the trash. I couldn't risk letting even a single drop pool anywhere. I'd bought cases of bottled water and kept them stacked in the living room. Drinking from bottles meant I could control exactly how much water I exposed myself to. I'd learned to open them carefully, tilting the bottle so nothing spilled. When I was done, I'd pour any remaining water down the drain immediately and throw the empty bottle away. No glasses, no cups that might leave rings of moisture on tables. The shower was the worst part. I'd managed to work up to taking them every 3 days, but only after checking that the drain was clear and the water pressure was low. I'd keep the bathroom door open and a towel ready to wipe down every surface the moment I was done. The whole process took maybe 3 minutes, and I'd spend the next hour making sure no water had splashed anywhere it shouldn't have. Mirrors were still a problem. If my eyes were even slightly wet, from allergies, from the dry desert air, from the tears that sometimes came when I thought about Lena, I'd avoid looking at any reflective surface. I'd learned that lesson in Mendocino. Water and reflections were a combination I couldn't risk. The apartment complex had a small pool in the courtyard that I could see from my kitchen window. I'd taped newspaper over that part of the glass on my 3rd day there. Even seeing that much water made my chest tight and my hands shake. The sound of kids splashing during the day was bad enough. I'd started wearing headphones whenever I was home. 3 weeks in, I found a job at an electronics repair shop downtown. The owner, a guy named Leo who looked like he'd been fixing radios since the 1950s, didn't ask about my background when I demonstrated I could diagnose a broken amplifier in under 10 minutes. Cash work, no questions, no paperwork that might connect me to my previous life. I spent my days in the back room, surrounded by circuit boards and soldering equipment, fixing things that other people had broken. The work helped keep my mind occupied, but Lena was always there. I'd be testing a speaker and suddenly remember her voice over the comm system, warning me about the pressure readings. I'd be examining a water-damaged radio and see her face in my mind, the way she'd looked when she was trying to tell me something was wrong with her helmet. The guilt sat in my chest like a weight that never got lighter. At night, I'd lie in bed and replay every decision I'd made on that dive. If I'd listened to her concerns about the equipment malfunctions, if I'd insisted we return to the surface when the instruments started acting up, if I'd been faster when I saw the water in her helmet. The what-ifs could keep me awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and listening to the desert wind rattle the windows. I'd started keeping a notebook where I wrote down everything I remembered about the temple, the creature, and what had happened in Mendocino. Not because I wanted to remember, but because I was terrified I might forget something important. The details felt crucial somehow, like they might matter again someday. The way the glyphs had pulsed with their own light, the temperature of the water when it had flooded my house, the exact frequency that had severed the connection. The supernatural manifestations had stopped completely after that night. No more puddles of salt water appearing on floors. No more whispers in languages I couldn't understand. No more shadows moving in my peripheral vision. Whatever I'd done with the frequency had worked, but I knew it had come at a cost. The creature was gone, but so was any chance I'd ever be the person I was before. I'd been Dr. Eris Thorne, marine researcher, someone who'd spent his life studying the ocean's mysteries. Now I was just Aris, a guy who fixed broken electronics in a desert town and couldn't stand the sight of standing water. I'd traded my life's work for survival, and most days I wasn't sure it had been worth it. The apartment stayed dry. I made sure of that. Every surface wiped clean, every drop of moisture eliminated before it could pool or reflect or become something more than just water. I'd survived the abyss, but I'd never escape what I'd found there. The guilt would follow me forever. and the fear would never completely fade. Some mornings, when the desert sun was just coming up and the air was still cool, I'd stand at my kitchen window and look east toward the mountains. The landscape was harsh and empty and completely free of the ocean that had once defined my entire existence. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the life I had now. I was alive, and Lena wasn't. And that was something I'd have to carry for whatever years I had left.